I noticed you had gender. Are there some females on pit crews now?
Yes, there are females on pit crews. This is not the majority. I know they are competing in the truck series right now. As for Sprint Cup, I do not believe so. When I left, there were not. But there had been women that had gone through the pit that were trained, and when you talked to them, they said, yeah, they could be on the Cup level if they wanted to. But they're out there. I think there's around 10 right now. This is, last time I checked, it was probably about a year ago. So it varies. So that being said, if you were to walk down pit road, what would you expect to see? Would you expect to see big, ripped guys, small guys? And that's kind of one of the questions we wanted to answer. We wanted to look and see what characteristics of fitness do these guys have. So we worked with Michael Waltrip Racing in addition to a company called Performance Prime, and we characterized their 3 teams based on fitness. So we ran 5 tests. We used the bod pod to measure their body fat percentage. We did a sit and reach test, measured their dominant hand grip strength, shoulder extension, and then we did a treadmill VO2 max test. And these are the general results that we got for the 3 teams. Pretty average for most of the part. I want to point one thing out, and that is the sit and reach score. So average of about 34 centimeters for the sit and reach. And now, according to ACSM, for their age, this is considered very good to excellent, which is interesting. If you look back to the pit study we did, sit and reach was a big predictor. So this is great to see. We're getting correlation between teams and actual success. I am going to point one other thing out. If you look at body fat percentage of about 28%, a little high. This was taken during December during the off season. Keep that in mind for one of the other studies I'm going to talk about. So what we did is we broke that down to individual positions. And so here we have sit and reach and hand grip strength for the various positions. No significant difference between positions. You can kind of see that maybe if we carried this out to more individuals, that the changers would have a higher grip strength, which makes sense. These guys are operating those pneumatic air guns. They crank out 700 foot-pounds of torque. They have to control that, 5 lug nuts in 1 second. You would think grip strength would be a common indicator of success right there. But overall, no difference between the pit crew members. Here we have percent body fat and VO2 max. Once again, no difference, but you start to see this trend here of that the changer and the jackman have a little bit of a lower body fat percentage, and as well as a higher VO2 max. I will point out that VO2 max is a great test, great thing to measure, but 12 seconds of a pit crew athlete, VO2 isn't going to have much determination on success if you really start to think about it. So now we kind of have an idea of what these guys look like, their fitness indicators. What we think really makes them athletes is their ability to adapt to the race situation. So their ability to go into an environment, this race environment, perform well and perform well for a long time that distinguishes them from an athletic population and just common mechanics. So the next 2 studies I'm going to talk about highlight this and how they have to adapt over the course of a race and the course of a season. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the change in body composition over the course of the 2 seasons, actually. We worked with Stewart-Haas Racing, and I want to give you some background of how this came to be. The strength and conditioning coach came to me and said, you know, Dave, I train these guys pretty hard, but every 4 months I have to change my resistance training program drastically. And the reason is that these guys come to me and say they're bored, they're tired, they don't want to work out. At the same time, the goals of the racing organization change as to whether we're trying to win races or win a championship. He said, so I'm always manipulating my program. I think it works, we're being successful, but I really don't know if it's really working. And one of the things I'd really be interested in is looking at body fat percentage and if that changes over the course of the season. And I said, sure, we can look at that. So every 4 months we measured percent body fat using the bod pod on these guys. And we had a total of 10 subjects, 4 carriers, 4 changers, and 2 jackmen. If you notice, we didn't have the gas man, the catch can. One of the natures of working with NASCAR is that you don't always get all the subjects at all the time. And we could not get access to these guys because they were actually building the cars and didn't have the free time to come to the lab and go in the bod pod. So we kept it to this group right here. We also measured percent body fat during the off season. Like I said, this time frame was defined by the strength coach who kind of had an idea of what was happening. So here we have 2 graphs. And it's the weight and percent body fat for the whole organization. And what you see on the left, here's weight. I know you can see over the course of 2 years, roughly 2 years, and there's no significant difference in weight. But if you look over here, we see an increase in percent body fat during the off season and the beginning of the season. Now what's really interesting about this is, as I talked about the long race season that these guys have, come November, these guys scatter. And whoever you talk to will say this. You know, come November, we can't expect the guys to be in the shop. We don't see much of them. They're burnt out. We want to let them go away and recover. And so these guys, almost as a way of kind of counteracting the stress they've been under, they don't work out, they don't eat well, they go on long vacations. And this is what we start to see. We see this increase in percent body fat. There's not much weight change, so we're thinking there might be some lean mass loss going on, which is detrimental because if you look at the beginning of the season, they're already in a hindered state. Now, for most sports, of course, it would be a problem, but NASCAR is unique in that the biggest races of the season take place during the beginning of the season. And that's your races like Daytona, California. And with NASCAR being so competitive, every point counts. You're already hindering yourself right here. So then what we did is we broke weight and percent fat into the positions. And a couple things to point out. One, the changer had a lower body weight than the other two positions. Makes sense. A baseball shortstop is obviously going to weigh less than a football lineman. And then you come over to percent body fat, and I want to point two things out. You still see that same trend of weight staying the same and percent body fat increasing in the beginning of the season. Also, what we found is that the carriers had a higher percent body fat than the jackman and the changer. It was kind of interesting to see. We have a couple ideas of why that is, not entirely sure. We think it has something to do with the fact that the changer and the jackman have to have such a quick muscle response to lifting the car or moving the tires at such a fast time, while the carriers are just carrying the tire over. The carriers have about 2.5 to 3 seconds to do their job as opposed to 1 second. A couple position differences may be there, or recruiting differences. Changers have a lower weight, carriers have a higher percent body fat, and this loss of lean mass, or proposed loss of lean mass during the beginning of the season, could hinder performance during the races. And so what we recommended to the Stewart-Haas guys was, let's restructure your resistance training program. Give the guys a break near the end of the season and get them in the beginning of the season so you're able to be more competitive for Daytona and races like that. Because if you talk to any athlete, you know, starting the season strong is always a good motivation for continuing the season strong. So the next study I'm going to talk about is one of the bigger studies we did, and this is the study that Dr. Lightfoot talked a little bit about. Was we measured core temperature and heart rate during 6 races during the NASCAR Cup season. It's kind of just a quick basis. We worked with Chip Ganassi Racing. They're now Earnhardt Ganassi Racing. And we had a control subject whose sole purpose was to stand in the pit box, not wearing the fire clothes, not wearing the helmet, and do nothing. So they got to watch a race, which is a lot of fun, but they just did nothing. We also had 6 pit crew athletes from Chip Ganassi Racing. And if you can tell right here, we lost subject number 3 and it was replaced with subject number 7. And as Dr. Lightfoot said, you know, racing is a very volatile business. And this individual's case was that he had been in racing for a while, he was having trouble a little bit, and the team cut him. So it was no hard feelings, thanks for everything, but we'll see you later. And so we actually ended up replacing him with the jackman. And because of this change in positions, we had to manipulate our position variables a little bit. We actually combined the changer and jackman into one variable. And the basis for this was that they do their pit stop duty in 1 second, as opposed to the carrier. Plus, we saw with the percent fat and VO2 max scores, they might have a little similar fitness characteristics. So we went ahead and did that. We worked with 2 teams. We've changed their numbers to 1 and 2 right here. And I want to point out that years of experience, percent body fat, VO2 max, there's no difference between the 2 teams. So they're pretty much identical in that aspect. So we then measured this at 6 races. As you can see here, we targeted the southeastern United States. We did that for a couple of reasons. One, similar climate. We wanted to try and control for our ambient temperature and humidity as best we could. We also wanted to measure intermediate and short tracks. We did not do super speedways or road courses because, like I said, road courses are only two per season. Kind of hard to get indicators from that. And also, these tracks, like I said, they're the most common, and they kind of propose the most difficulty strain on physiological adaptations right there. And lastly, the most important reason we studied these races was that NASCAR said we could. As with anything in science, your IRB, your IACUC approval dictates how you do it. So just like NASCAR approval, we had these 6 races to work at. We also looked at asphalt and concrete tracks and whether they had an influence on temperature. We did day and night races. I can say that temperature-wise, there's no difference in day and night races. Also, I want to point one thing out right here is that all the races were different in length and time. So what we did was we broke our measurements down into 15-minute intervals, as well as taking a measurement after every pit stop. And then we averaged those core temperature and heart rate variables into 4 race segments because the middle of one race could have been the end of another race. So we had a baseline measurement, a beginning, middle, and an end measurement. And we used the HQ incorporated core temp wireless ingestible sensor, and here you can see this is at Martinsville. I'm measuring the core temperature right here. There's a little pill about the size of a vitamin these guys would swallow. Sensor with a radio transmitter worked within about a distance of a foot, and we had them take it 3 hours before the start of the race. Our baseline measure was 1 hour before the race, and like I said, we did 15-minute measurements after that. What was great about this piece of equipment was it incorporated a polar heart rate monitor, so we were able to get heart rate on these guys as well. And as you can see, here's the fire suit, and it's really unique in that it's made of a Nomex material. It does not breathe very well. As someone that's worn one of these, I can tell you it's not the most pleasant thing to wear. And so you start to think about, this is obviously going to hinder your thermal regulatory abilities through evaporation of sweat and whatnot. So what we started to notice was here's our initial track difference that we saw. So what we're looking at is core temperature and heart rate, and then their response is based on the types of track, intermediate and short, and whether it be asphalt and concrete. I want to point one thing out that we saw here is that the concrete tracks had a higher core temperature than the asphalt tracks. And initially, we thought to ourselves, well, that's odd. We think asphalt would radiate more heat, it'd be a little bit hotter. Why is core temperature lower on these tracks? And then we started looking at the heart rate data, and in probably not the best research mode, we started talking to our subjects saying, well, what's going on with these tracks? I mean, your heart rate's higher on the asphalt tracks, and what we found is just by pure chance, some of the tracks we looked at, these guys were under severe psychological stress. The team we were working at, like I said, was going through a merger. They didn't know if they were going to have a job next season. And the brunt of all this was going on during this time. So we started thinking, well, the heart rate response we're seeing is purely psychological. And I'm going to touch on that in just a second here, what we think is really going on. And here you see the position differences, and same type of thing. We see that the changer and jackman have a higher heart rate. I remember one race halfway through, I went up to the changer, I said, okay, here's your heart rate monitor. And the guy looked at me and said, it ain't happening, Dave. I mean, in typical NASCAR type, I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, you know, it's really binding. I get really nervous when I'm doing a pit stop. You know, I just don't want to wear it. And through some coaxing and convincing, we got him to wear it. But we started thinking, well, shoot, if these guys have 1 second to do their job and they feel they're hindered by wearing a heart rate monitor, that's going to jack heart rate up. So maybe all this heart rate stuff we're seeing is due to psychological stress. Well, then what we started really looking at was the core temperature values. And what we see here is that the changer and jackman actually had a lower core temperature than the carrier and the control subject in this case. And if you go back to this graph too, you see that the lower core temperature is associated with a higher heart rate. So what we think is really going on is, like we've studied in XPhys, thermal regulation is working. Core temperature increases, so does heart rate, increasing blood shunting to the extremities, aiding in body cooling. While these fire suits are not the best for thermal regulation, there's still something going on there.